Contrast, Casino Royale is a near-perfect Bond film, arguably the best in the franchise, and certainly one of my favorites. However, you could say the mission of bankrupting Le Chiffre does not make any logical sense when you start to overthink it. Thanks to Bond foiling Le Chiffre's plan of blowing up the Skyfleet plane, preventing the raising of the stocks and thus the funding of terrorist money, MI6 now knows exactly who's behind this and where Le Chiffre is going to be. He's guilty and they can bring him in. But instead of doing that, they now want Bond to play cards against him. Fair and square too. They're not going to fix the game for him or anything. MI6 knows he's guilty. Does the poker game make Le Chiffre somehow more guilty? They just reason that if Le Chiffre loses, he will be completely desperate for protection from his creditors. But he's already completely out of money now. Why risk this whole mission if it wouldn't prove more than they already know and would just result in Le Chiffre being in exactly the same financial position he's already in at the beginning? It seems like a huge risk, especially considering MI6 could financially fund terrorism if Bond fails. The fact that Quantum of Solace was influenced by the 2008 writer's strike is no secret. Lots of plot points in the film are set up to be quite significant but lead absolutely nowhere. An example of this is Bond's breakthrough in his mission of identifying lots of prominent members within Quantum at the opera sequence, taking pictures of all sorts of important faces. This plot point continues in the way that Bond visits Mathis' place in Italy to try and identify them. One of the important members brought to our attention is Guy Haines.
That's Guy Haines. You don't know him? Should I?
I mean, it's a really good question by Bond, seeing as how we spent a lot of time building all of this up and how the movie comes to a point of even naming one of these members. You would of course assume that Guy Haines would play a significant part in the rest of Bond's mission. This, however, is the last mention we get of him. The identifying of these faces becomes entirely pointless and goes nowhere. Bond may as well have identified Peter Griffin here and the movie would have played out in exactly the same way. Though Skyfall is generally one of Daniel Craig's most praised Bond films, there's no denying that you need a lot of contrivance to swallow the villain's scheme. Silva supposedly planned his escape to a T and relied on a lot of circumstances and variables purely based on coincidence, knowing he would be captured at the island, knowing he would be placed into the secret underground MI6 building, somehow knowing that the new Q would plug his laptop into the system so he could escape, at an exact time knowing Bond would follow him and having explosive charges be planted at a particular point of the tunnel so he could blow up the wall at the exact time he calculated beforehand that Bond would be chasing him at the exact point of the timetable of one of the subway trains that would fall through the wall, knowing he would end up at M's hearing at the exact day she would be there. It's a lot. Somehow he was able to plan all of this out, yet he did not anticipate the fire extinguishers. Of course, for Spectre there is plenty to point out in how ridiculous it is that Blofeld turned out to be Bond's stepbrother in Daniel Craig's Bond continuity. But instead, did you also notice that Blofeld is constantly setting up death traps for Bond that he somehow is fully expecting him to survive? Why did Blofeld send out his new best hitman in Mr. Hinks on the train if he also fully expected Bond to perfectly arrive at the crater base? Even taking the time and energy of sending out a car for him, decorating a room for him and Madeline complete with their childhood pictures and a welcoming reception. So if he expected Bond to simply survive a fight with Hinks, why would he send Hinks out to his death in the first place? The same holds for the climax. How did Blofeld know that Bond would overpower the guards in the security van? Because he did go through the hassle of spray painting his name on the MI6 building's wall, and he did bother to print out all of the important people to Bond's life and stand behind a big piece of bulletproof glass. What if Bond never defeated those guards? Would Blofeld just end up waiting behind that glass this whole time? With No Time to Die, of course, it's pretty popular to point out how stupid it seems that the nanobots somehow cannot be wiped out by the EMP watch, or how Bond would never give up in the way that he does at the end of the movie. But a plot hole immediately apparent to me, straight from our first viewing in cinema, was the reveal of Bond having a daughter. My first thought was, so who took care of the child this whole time Madeline was in London just now? It's not like Madeline had any next of kin left to take care of her. It also doesn't seem like Madeline brought her daughter with her during this time in the UK. Furthermore, how did MI6 never notice that Madeline was pregnant or had a daughter this whole time whilst he's been a key communicator to Blofeld these past couple of years? It's all very strange.